Good morning, everyone. In the last session, we were discussing about various strategies for the production of industrial enzymes, and we will try to understand in today's session the production and uses of industrial enzymes with emphasis on proteases. In continuation of our previous session, we have learned that there are four main ways of growing the microorganisms by using submerged fermentation, and they are: number 1, batch culture; number 2, fed batch culture; number 3, perfusion batch culture; and number 4, continuous culture. So the cost of production of many enzymes when it is using a solid substrate fermentation is lower in comparison to the submerged fermentation. So submerged fermentation is usually at higher cost in terms of production of enzymes when compared to solid substrate fermentation. So at industrial scale, solid substrate fermentation is considered for the production of low value enzymes. That means which do not have much of pharmaceutical significance. Low value enzymes such as cellulase, xylanase, amylase, etc. Then moving on to the strain improvement. Most of the strains or the microorganisms that are employed at industrial scale for the production of proteases, they have been improved by using the approach of classical selection. So what are these classical selection approaches? So there are four classes of mutations by which the strain improvement is carried out. Number 1, spontaneous mutations. Number 2, mutations due to error-prone replication bypass of naturally occurring DNA damage. Number 3, errors introduced during DNA repair. Number 4, induced mutations caused by mutagens. Right. So these are the important four classes of mutations by which the strain improvement for industrial production of enzymes have been employed. Number 1, the spontaneous mutations. Number 2, mutations due to error prone replication bypass of naturally occurring DNA damage. Number 3, errors introduced during DNA repair. Number 4, induced mutations caused by mutagens. Now, if you just look at the downstream processing, that is, the goal of the fermentation process is to produce a final product, final formulated enzyme product. And it also includes many post fermentation unit operations. So if you just try to understand the downstream processing, the goal of any fermentation process is to produce a final formulated product, formulated enzyme product, and it includes many post fermentation unit operations. Still, the maximum production rate could be the most important factor. So any company which is looking for production of enzymes through fermentative approaches, maximum production rate will be the important factor, the most important factor. However, lowest unit production cost could also be an added driving force, right? Because the fermentation process to produce a final formulated enzyme product include many post fermentation unit operations, right? Such as separation of the biomass, filtration, concentration, chromatographic separations, electrophoretic analysis for the purity, then going for crystallization, and then you are ending up with the formulated product. So there could be many or several post fermentation unit operations, and lowest unit operation or the production cost, operation cost could also be an important driving force. So there are two driving forces. Number one, maximum production rate. Number two, lowest unit production cost or the unit operation cost. Both of them are post fermentation unit operations. That is, I am speaking about after the process of fermentation, that is downstream process. In the downstream process, these are the two important driving force or the factors to be considered. That is, number one, maximum production rate, and number two, lowest unit production cost. So optimization of each individual unit operation does not always lead to an optimal overall process performance, right? So if you just keep on optimizing individual unit operations, say for example, if you start optimizing cell separation unit operation, it doesn't mean that it will always lead to an optimal overall process performance, because if these unit operations are having a strong interactions between them, if ultrafiltration unit operation is dependent on cell separation, and if chromatographic unit operation is dependent on ultrafiltration and cell separation unit operations, that means if they are interdependent, if there is a strong interactions between these unit operations, then optimization of each individual unit operations does not always lead to an optimal overall process performance. So understanding the interactions, understanding the strong interactions between these unit operations is crucial to the overall process optimization, right? So you should be very careful to analyze how the unit operations work and how many unit operations are required post fermentation process, and whether these unit operations are strongly interacting with each other. So if you want to optimize the unit operations, does the unit operation optimization enhances the overall process optimization? So all these questions need to be answered in the downstream processing when the goal is to produce a final formulated enzyme product, right? So for example, product concentration or purity in the fermentation broth can significantly impact the downstream purification unit operations. So this is what I said. One unit operation is dependent on another unit operation, or it is strongly interacting with the another unit operations. So for example, product concentration or purity in the fermentation broth can significantly impact the downstream production or the purification unit operations. So if the fermentation is optimized for the productivity without taking into account its effect on the purification step. So if you just neglect its effect on the purification step and taking into consideration only the productivity, the overall process productivity can be negatively affected, right? So that is why if there is a strong interaction, you should be very careful in optimizing the individual unit operations. And then the use of anti-foaming agents in the fermentation process is another example. By reducing foaming in the fermentation, a higher working volume can be used to optimize the fermentation unit operations. So care has to be taken, as antifoams, they can have adverse effect on the membranes, that is filtration unit membranes. So you should be very, very careful when adding the anti-foaming agents. Thus, it is important to have knowledge of how the fermentation process is going to affect the other unit operations in the downstream processing. So, if you just keep on adding the anti-foaming agents without taking into consideration the membrane being used for the filtration, then it can definitely have or surely have adverse effect on the filtration unit membrane. Right. So overall process optimization is dependent on whether the individual unit operations are having strong interactions or not. Right. So most of the industrial enzymes produced are extracellular. This we have studied in the previous session. And if it is extracellular, it is easy for the downstream activities or events. And the first step in their purification is separation of the biomass or the cells from the fermentation. Now what happens if it is intracellular enzyme? For intracellular enzymes, you have to go for disruption of the cells either by number one mechanical or number two non-mechanical methods. So you require a mechanical or non-mechanical methods to disrupt the cell membrane if it is the intracellular enzyme. But most of the industrial enzymes produced are extracellular, and the very first step in their purification is separation of the cells from the broths, that is fermentation broth. Now we have the filtration, centrifugation, flocculation, flotation, and finally concentration methods, which ultimately lead to the development of a concentrated product. Right? So even salting out or solvent precipitation methods could be employed for concentrating the proteins at industrial scale. Then we have ultrafiltration, electrophoresis, and chromatography to produce a highly purified enzyme product. Right. So in this figure, it shows the basic steps followed during the downstream processing of microbial enzyme production process. So this shows that extracellular enzymes are more desirable for industrial applications for the reason that number one, they are more economical as per downstream process, and number two, easier to obtain the final product. However, if the number of steps and economical viability is highly associated with the degree of purity required, right? So if the number of steps and economical viability, if it is highly associated with the degree of purity required, then it is in turn associated with the end application of the enzyme, right? So what are the number of steps? Whether this number of steps in obtaining the final enzyme product is associated with the economic viability, whether the steps number of steps being used is economically viable, and whether it is really associated with the purity of the product, and what is the end application of the product. So all these factors are taken into consideration when you are having a strategy for downstream processing of the formulated enzyme product. Right. So enzymes, they are sold as stabilized liquid concentrates or maybe even particulate solids. So enzymes are often they are exposed to humid conditions, even hot conditions, or sometimes even oxidative environments in some of the industrial applications. Say for example, in detergents, in textile industries for textile formulations, as well as in food and beverage industries or the processing industries. And there are chemical stabilizers which are available to protect the thermolabile enzymes, that means thermally and chemically to a greater extent. However, it is preferred to select the enzymes that are structurally more stable or resistant to oxidation during screening itself. Right. And formulation enhances the stability of several counteracting primary forces. That is number one, denaturation. Number two, catalytic site deactivation. And number three, proteolysis. Right. So when you are going for formulations enhances the stability of counteracting the primary forces of deactivation. So any forces which tend to deactivate the purified enzyme, that has to be taken into consideration. That means you have to overcome those primary forces of deactivation. So that is the reason why you go for formulation after or in the process of product development. So when you are going for formulations, how to deactivate these primary forces? Number one, the deactivation forces are denaturation. Number two, the deactivation forces are catalytic site deactivation. Number three, the deactivation forces are proteolysis. So how to deactivate? How to overcome these forces of deactivation? Denaturation occurs by physical unfolding of an enzyme's tertiary protein structure under normal or under thermal or chemical stresses. So once an enzyme begins to unfold, it becomes dramatically more vulnerable to deactivation and proteolysis. So you have to minimize the unfolding. How to minimize the unfolding? In order to minimize the unfolding, the formulation should be in such a way that it can alter the protein's environment so as to induce a compact protein structure. So your formulation should be in such a way that the protein attains a compact structure and it minimizes the unfolding process. Denaturation is the unfolding of an enzyme's tertiary structure. So if you can protect by some formulations, then naturally the protein will be active. Right. So how it is done? This is done mostly by adding water associating compounds such as sugars, polyhydric alcohols, and lyotrophic salts. So they preferentially act by exclusion principle, that is detach water molecules from the protein structure. So that is how the protein becomes more compact. Right. So that means essentially we are trying to understand how to formulate the enzyme product so as to overcome the primary forces of deactivation. Number one, the forces of deactivation is denaturation. Number two, catalytic site deactivation, and number three, proteolysis. So how to overcome this? Essentially, we have to minimize the unfolding of the protein. So that is done by adding water associating compounds such as sugars, polyhydric alcohols, and lyophilic or lyotrophic salts. So they preferentially exclude or detach water molecules from the protein surface. So the protein becomes more compact. And second thing, the best way to combat the active site inactivation is to ensure sufficient levels of any required cofactors, to add reversible inhibitors, and to exclude reactive or oxidizing species from the formulation. So formulation should not have any reactive or oxidizing species. so that it leads to catalytic site deactivation. So when you're trying to formulate, you should be very careful to see to it that catalytic site deactivation doesn't occur. So the best way to combat the active site inactivation is to ensure sufficient levels of any required cofactors, or to add reversible inhibitors, or to exclude any reactive or oxidizing species from the formulation. So there are several key secondary requirements besides enzyme activity stability, such as preserving against microbial contamination, avoidance of physical precipitation, minimizing the formation of aerosols or dust, and optimizing the aesthetic color and odor. So this is also equally important in obtaining the final formulated enzyme product. So moving on to microbial proteases, the production and uses of these proteases. So in the industrial sector, the Bacillus species are the most active and dynamic extracellular alkaline protease producer. Right. So the Bacillus species are the most active and dynamic extracellular alkaline protease producer. So of the three largest groups of industrial enzymes, proteases are one of them, and their global market is exponentially increasing every year. So of the 60% of the enzymes marketed worldwide, believe it or not, 20% is from the proteases. So it is almost one third. So the proteases have been successfully produced by researchers from different microbial sources. Microbial sources mean bacteria, fungi, etc. And microorganisms, they account a two-thirds share of the commercial protease around the globe. Since the advent of enzymology, these microbial proteolytic proteases have been most widely studied enzyme classes, and these enzymes have gained a lot of interest not only due to their vital role in metabolic activities, but also due to their immense utilization in the industries or at industrial scale. Right. So the proteases that are available in the market are of microbial origin because number one, high yield, number two, less time consumption, number three, less space requirement for the production, number four, ample opportunity to manipulate the genetics of the microorganism, and number five, cost effectiveness of the handling and production. So all these factors have made them or the microorganisms suitable for biotechnological applications of proteases or production of proteases and marketing the proteases. That is number one, high yield, number two, less time consumption, number three, less space requirement, number four, lofty genetic manipulation, that is ample opportunity to manipulate the genetics, number five, cost effectiveness. Right. If you just look at the table over here, it gives different types of the proteases and their acting pH range and uses of these proteases, and the classification and also the sources. So alkaline type of proteases, where they have a pH range between 9 to 11, they find application in detergent and leather industry, and they have been classified as serine proteases, subtilis Carlsberg and subtilis Novo. Then they are mostly produced by bacterial species, even marine shipworms, mushrooms, etc. And then we have acidic type of proteases where the pH range is from 3.8 to 5.6, and they find application in soy sauce, protein hydrolysates, digestive aids, and in production of seasoning materials, improving texture of the flour paste, and tendering the fibril muscle. And they are classified as aspartic proteases and pepsin, retropepsins, and they are mostly produced by fungal species such as we have Aspergillus niger, we have Oryzae, and so on. Then we have the neutral type of proteases where the pH range is between 5 to 8, and they find applications in food industries and the brewing industry. Then they are classified as nutriase, thermolysins, and they are produced by the genus Bacillus. So these are some of the important types of proteases, their pH range, and where they are actually finding the use or applications, and what are the classifications of these types of proteases, and what are the probable preferred sources of these proteases, right? So if you just look at specifically the methodology for the protease production, to begin with, I have taken an example of fungus. So these fungus, they are isolated into the PDA medium, that is potato dextrose agar medium, and then the microorganisms or the fungal species, they are screened for protease enzyme production, and then in the fermentation process the SSF is carried out. So for the low value enzymes, and for high value enzymes, of course it is the submerged fermentation. Then the flasks are inoculated with the spore solutions, and then they are incubated, and at the end of the fermentations the cultures are extracted, and the supernatant will be used as crude enzyme extract. So if you just look for the purification and characterization of the proteases, the crude extract is precipitated to up to 70% saturation with ammonium sulfate, and then it is dialyzed. And then several column separations are adopted. The filtrate is purified by column chromatography such as DEAE cellulose chromatographic columns, especially with respect to the fungal species what we are trying to understand. So if you just look at the overall applications of the proteases, they are secreting from the yeast and filamentous fungi, and we have the bacterial species, and they find applications in food, beverages, and bioremediations, in keratin degradation, soil protein, potato pulp powder degradations. Then we have in wine industry, in shake industry. Then we have in cheese for ripening and maturation. Then we have dry cured meat for the flavor and texture. Then we have tempeh. Then we have the koji. So I have picked up only few applications. Of course, the proteases have several more than what we have shown over here, several more applications than what we have shown over here. So with this information, we have tried to understand what are the proteases, and how the proteases are produced, and what are the probable applications of the proteases at industrial scale. So I'll stop my discussion over here. We can continue our discussion with a newer concept in the next session. Till then, I'll take your leave. Thank you very much for your kind listening. Thank you.